You know, the talk of the town, especially if you're tracking socioeconomic progress for your UPSC exams, is the World Bank's recent report.
Oh, yeah, definitely making waves.
It really is. It highlights India lifting a massive 171 million people out of extreme poverty. That's between 2011-12 and 2022-23.
A huge number. And the rate itself.
Exactly. Dropped from 16.2% down to just 2.3%. Pretty striking.
It really is.
So let's really dig into this. This data comes from the World Bank's Spring 2025 Poverty and Equity Brief, the PE report. And importantly for you listening, our source here is the PIB, the Press Information Bureau.
Right. These PBs give us that twice-yearly snapshot of poverty, prosperity, inequality across developing countries.
Yeah, so crucial for understanding trends. And our mission for this deep dive. To really get past those headlines, we need to understand the details, the nuances of how India reduced poverty, but also, critically, look at the social challenges that are still, very much there. Vital stuff for both your mains and prelims prep.
Absolutely. That 171 million figure, it's remarkable on its own, just over a decade.
It makes you think, what drove that?
Precisely. And seeing that rate plummet from over 16% to basically 2%, it really points to some significant underlying shifts.
For sure. And what's really useful, I think, especially for UPSC aspirants listening, is how the report breaks it down. It's not just one big national number.
No, it digs deeper.
Yeah, it shows the decline happened in both rural and urban India. Rural areas saw a huge drop from 18.4% down to 2.8%.
That's a massive shift in the countryside.
And urban areas, too, down from 10.7% to just 1.1%.
So pretty widespread progress, then.
It suggests that, doesn't it? Which kind of hints at maybe a more inclusive growth pattern, not just focused in one area.
That's a key point to analyze, definitely, whether the benefits really spread out, something to consider for your development model understanding.
And then there's the regional angle, which is fascinating.
Ah, yes, the state-level contributions?
Right. The 5 most populous states, UP, Maharashtra, Bihar, West Bengal, Madhya Pradesh, they had about 65% of India's extreme poor back in 2011-12.
Okay, a huge concentration.
But they also accounted for 2/3 of the decline by 2022-23.
Wow, so the progress was also concentrated, in a way, or rather driven significantly by these large states.
Yeah, it raises questions for your UPSC prep, right? Like, what specific factors were at play in those states? Was it state policies, national schemes landing well?
That state-wise breakdown is crucial. It suggests that even in places with historically high poverty, something worked. Maybe targeted interventions, maybe just the scale of national programs finally having an effect there.
It's that kind of nuance you need for mains answers, I think.
Definitely. Goes beyond the headline number.
Now, the World Bank doesn't just look at income, the dollar a day kind of thing. They use the Multidimensional Poverty Index, the MPI. Can you maybe elaborate on that for folks studying? What does it measure?
Sure. The MPI is vital because, poverty isn't just about lack of money, is it? It includes other deprivations, things like education years of schooling, kids attending school, health, nutrition, child mortality, and living standards, cooking fuel, sanitation, drinking water, electricity, housing, assets.
Okay, so a much broader view.
Exactly. And India's progress here is also really noteworthy. The MPI score fell dramatically from 53.8% back in 2005-06.
Wow, over half the population.
Down to 16.4% by 2019-21, and the World Bank measure puts it even lower, around 15.5% by 2022-23.
So significant improvement in quality of life, not just income.
That's what it suggests, improvements in those non-monetary areas. For your prep, think about which government schemes might map onto those MPI indicators, Swachh Bharat for sanitation, Ujjwala for cooking fuel, etc.
Good point. And this progress, it seems like it's also reflected in income distribution. The report mentions the Gini index improving. Can you break that down?
Yeah, the consumption-based Gini index. It went from 28.8 in 2011-12 down to 25.5 in 2022-23.
Lower is better, right? Less inequality.
Correct. The Gini measures inequality. 0 is perfect equality. 100 is perfect inequality. So a drop means inequality decreased. Developed countries are often below 30, or 0.30 depending on the scale.
So India is moving in that direction.
It is. It's a positive sign. Suggests maybe the gap between the rich and poor narrowed somewhat, at least in terms of consumption.
Does it tell us how that happened, though? Like, did the poor get richer faster, or...
Well, the index itself doesn't explicitly say why. For a deeper analysis, you'd need to consider if it's growth lifting the bottom or maybe slower growth at the top, or both. But the trend is towards less inequality based on this measure.
Okay, so it does seem like the economic growth benefits are reaching maybe a wider group. The report also talks about progress at the lower middle income level. That's the USD 3.65 a day line.
Right, and that's another striking figure. At that poverty line, the rate dropped from 61.8%.
Nearly two-thirds.
Down to 28.1%. That translates to, wait for it, 378 million people lifted out of poverty at that specific level.
378 million, that's huge.
It really reinforces the idea that economic momentum is impacting those lower income brackets in both rural and urban areas. Crucial data point for demonstrating the scale of change in your UPSC answers.
And what about jobs? The report touches on employment trends too. Some good news, but also some persistent issues.
Yeah, a mixed picture, as often is the case with employment data. On the plus side, overall, employment rates are up, especially for women, which is encouraging.
Okay.
And urban unemployment hit its lowest level since 2017-18.
That sounds positive, but
The structure of employment is still a concern. Only about 23% of non-farm paid jobs are formal. That means most people are in the informal sector, lacking job security, benefits, etc.
right, the precarity issue.
Exactly. And the gender gap remains massive. Despite women's employment rate being around 31%, there are still 234 million more men in paid work.
234 million more men.
Yeah. So from your UPSC perspective, while job numbers might look better in some ways, the quality of jobs and achieving real gender parity in the workforce, those are still major challenges.
Definitely areas for policy focus. Okay, so we've seen the positive numbers from the World Bank, significant poverty reduction. But this also, maybe implicitly, shines a light on the social issues that are still deeply tangled up with poverty in India.
Absolutely. It raises that key question. Even with better economic stats, how does poverty keep making certain groups more vulnerable?
Like marginalized communities, SCs, STs.
Exactly. Poverty just deepens the marginalization for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Limited access to good education, healthcare, decent jobs. It creates this cycle.
And discrimination on top of that.
Compounded by discrimination, yes. It entrenches that exclusion. When you discuss social justice for your exams, that intersection of poverty and caste is absolutely fundamental.
And that lack of resources hits health hard, doesn't it? Malnutrition, health disparities.
Precisely. In poorer areas, you see higher rates of health problems. Malnutrition is a big one, especially hitting women and children hardest. Access to nutritious food, basic health care, it's just not consistently there.
Even with programs like Poshan Abhiyan.
Those initiatives exist, yes, like the National Nutrition Mission. But reaching the most vulnerable effectively and tackling the root causes like food insecurity itself, that remains incredibly complex. A key point for health and human development topics in UPSC.
Access to basics like water, too, that came up, especially rural India.
Yes, water stress. The NFHS 5 data, the National Family Health Survey, is stark. Nearly half, 39.8% of rural households still don't have piped drinking water.
Almost half. That's quite something in 2024.
It is. And it disproportionately hits poor communities, waterborne diseases, sanitation challenges. It all feeds back into poor health and limits well-being. Vital statistic when you're talking rural development or public health.
And energy access, another basic need often missing in poorer regions.
Absolutely. Energy poverty is a real barrier. Lack of affordable, reliable electricity, especially in tribal belts, remote areas. It holds back education, limits economic opportunities. Think about kids trying to study after dark. Initiatives like the Pradhan Mantri Ujjwal Yojana for LPG connections help with cleaner cooking fuel. But ensuring everyone eligible gets the benefit, tackling data gaps from things like the older SECC 2011 data, those are ongoing challenges, relevant for infrastructure and social equity discussions in your exams.
It's not just about the physical stuff either, is it? There's the mental toll, mental poverty.
That's a really important, often overlooked aspect. The chronic stress, the anxiety, the depression that comes with constant financial insecurity, with social marginalization, it takes a huge toll.
It must impact everything. Productivity, decision-making.
Definitely. And then there's the stigma around poverty and mental health, which stops people seeking help. Add in factors like high graduate unemployment, which the data shows, or perceptions of rising inequality. It can really worsen things. Crucial dimension for social issues and human capital development topics.
And gender disparity seems to run through all of this, locking women into poverty cycles.
It's deeply intertwined. You see it in early marriage rates in poorer communities, domestic violence, and as we mentioned, that huge gap in workforce participation.
That 234 million more men figure.
Exactly. And India's ranking in the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report, 129th in 2024, highlights those economic participation disparities. Tackling gender inequality isn't just fair, it's essential for poverty reduction, a very common theme in UPSC essays and GS papers.
Lastly, the link between poverty and the environment, it can be a vicious cycle, right?
Precisely. When people are struggling for basic survival, they might be forced into unsustainable practices, cutting down forests for fuel or land, overgrazing, burning biomass,
Which then degrades the environment.
which then hurts them back. Reduces farm productivity, makes them more vulnerable to climate change impacts like floods or droughts, causes health problems from pollution. That poverty-environment nexus is critical for sustainable development topics in your prep.
Okay, so it's clear. While the World Bank news is good, these interconnected social issues are still major hurdles, which brings us to the crucial next step for us, especially for you preparing for UPSC.
Yep.
What can actually be done? What are the measures needed?
Well, it has to be a multi-pronged approach, obviously. You need to strengthen the social safety nets, the welfare programs, and affirmative action policies need to be effective in boosting access to healthcare, education, jobs for marginalized groups.
Things like financial inclusion, skills.
Exactly. Initiatives like PM Jan Yojana for bank accounts, financial access, and schemes like DDU-GKY for skilling rural youth. They're vital pieces for economic empowerment.
And focusing specifically on that gender gap we discussed, how do we really bridge that?
It needs more than just having schemes like Beti Bachao, Beti Patao, or Sukanya Samriddhi Yojana. They need rigorous implementation, proper monitoring.
Making sure they actually work on the ground.
Right. And the focus has to be broad. Quality education for girls, comprehensive healthcare access, and crucially, economic independence. That means pushing for equal pay, targeted skill development for women, creating workplaces that are genuinely gender inclusive, key points for any answer on women's empowerment.
And the basics, energy and water, seems fundamental. What are the ways forward there?
Definitely fundamental. For energy, promoting decentralized solutions looks promising. Things like solar power for remote areas, maybe powering 4G towers or local microgrids.
Getting power to the last mile.
Yes, and scaling up national schemes like the PM Suryagar Free Electricity Rooftop Solar Initiative. For water, it's about continuing large-scale conservation efforts and really pushing the Jal Jeevan mission to meet its goal of piped water for every rural home, vital for infrastructure and rural development topics.
What about mental health? It often feels like the poor relation in policy discussions.
It often is, unfortunately. We need to seriously scale up the National Mental Health Program, make counseling, support services much more accessible, especially in poor communities, both rural and urban.
Using existing networks.
Yes, training community health workers, like the ASHA workers, to be first responders for mental health issues could be huge. Plus, running sustained awareness campaigns to fight the stigma. It's a critical, often missed part of social development.
And finally, how do we make sure all these welfare schemes, all this money, actually reaches the right people? Minimizing leaks, fraud.
Transparency and accountability are absolutely key. This is where technology can really help. Using Aadhaar for authentication, using eKYC verification. These tools can significantly cut down on fake or duplicate beneficiaries.
Making sure the resources aren't wasted.
Exactly. It ensures the aid goes to those who genuinely need it. That whole aspect of governance, efficient public service delivery, highly relevant for your UPSC prep, especially in GS Paper 2 and ethics.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, the picture is, well, complex. The World Bank report shows clear, significant progress on extreme poverty reduction in India. That's undeniable.
Remarkable progress, really.
But as we've discussed, poverty is deeply intertwined with so many persistent social issues: marginalization, health gaps, water scarcity, gender inequality, environmental stress.
The fight isn't over just because the extreme poverty number looks better.
Absolutely. And for all of you preparing for your UPSC exams, understanding these trends, the challenges that remain, and the policy options is crucial. It gives you that comprehensive view of India's development story, vital for prelims and especially for mains.
You need that depth.
So while the numbers are encouraging, the big question we're left with, maybe for you to think about, is how does India ensure this progress isn't just a statistic, but becomes truly inclusive, truly sustainable? How do we reach the most vulnerable and tackle those deep-rooted inequalities?
And maybe a final thought to chew on. Given this complex web of issues, what kind of integrated policies do you think could really foster that long-term equitable development? How do we connect the dots between, say, gender, health, environment, and poverty reduction in policy design?
Some really vital points to reflect on there. We hope this deep dive has given you a clearer, more nuanced picture for your UPSC preparation.
Hope it was useful.
If you found this discussion valuable, please do hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives like this, and definitely leave a comment below if you have questions or other topics you'd like us to tackle.
We do read the comments.
And just to reiterate, all the information we discussed today is based on the World Bank's Spring 2025 Poverty and Equity Brief Report, sourced via the Press Information Bureau, PIB. Thanks for listening.